What's going on, everybody? This is my 2023 ND2 Miata, and this is a 2023 Subaru BRZ. You're probably wondering, what am I doing with these two cars side by side? Well, as you know, this is my little project. This is my son's project. Now, some things have come up lately, and I might be getting rid of this for one of these, but we'll have to see. Let's have a look at the 2023 BRZ and why it might be a better option for a daily driven car.
So first things first, we're sitting here in my 2023 Mazda Miata MX-5 ND2 RF. That's a mouthful when you say. There's more to say about this car in the name than the actual space that is currently in here. I'm sure you can attest to this. My son and I are, average size pork chops at 5'6", 5'7" over here, and about 200 pounds apiece. But as you can see, the first thing that we notice with this, obviously, is there's very little cubby space. I've got a small little cubby in front of me here, the shifter that my phone barely fits in. A lot of times I got to put it in the cup holder that Evan's leg is right up against right now, which would normally be sitting back here because the cup holders in this car are modular. So anyway, I've got my phone. It's a iPhone Pro Max, so it doesn't really fit all that well in the cubby. Anyways, can be solved really easily by putting a MagSafe kind of connectors. However, my Merce, I've got nowhere to put this. Yeah, it's my Merce, okay? I got this in Portugal. So I'm just gonna jam my phone right here beside my hip as if I had a lot of space, because these seats, albeit these Recaros are super comfortable, they're not necessarily, they're snug for 200-pound men. Anyways, let's get started in the Miata. So first things first, this car is essentially stock, with the exception of some 17-inch wheels that I've added, Koenig Hypergrams, with Advan 8009 tire. I do apologize, I don't have the stock BBS forged wheels and the Bridgestone S001s. Aside from that, the car is essentially stock. Now, part of the reason why we're getting into this video is because when I purchased this ND2 Miata, I was replacing a vehicle, my Civic Type R, that was my daily driven vehicle, and my one car does all. I fell in love with the bespoke and kind of built for purpose nature of the Miata. And when I purchased the vehicle, I really intended to add a daily driven vehicle in addition to this Miata. I was actually thinking about getting a small SUV or maybe a small truck, and this was going to be more or less my summer driven vehicle. Now, some things have changed, so it occurred to me this is a vehicle that I'm really not going to get a whole lot of enjoyment with. And I started thinking about, well, is this the most sensible option given the fact that I'm not going to be driving it very often? It sits parked over the winter, and contemplated a couple of things. One of the things I thought of was, well, why don't I just drive it over the winter? I did have the car rust protected with Crown, so there's no reason why I theoretically couldn't put winter tires on this vehicle and drive it. As a matter of fact, it is February here in Southern Ontario, and it's about 5 degrees outside, sunny, and we haven't seen snow in about 2 weeks. So there's really, at this point, at least in this particular winter, at the moment, there's really no reason why I couldn't theoretically drive this with a set of maybe some good snow tires, again, continue to rust proof the car. However, it comes down to the practicality. This car is not exactly the most practical, and if you have an ND2 Miata or an ND1 Miata or any Miata for that matter, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's kind of cramped. There's really not a whole lot of storage space. It does lack a little bit when it comes to your trunk space. However, it does get the job done. It does it okay, but it doesn't do it terrific. Probably better options out there for about the same money or potentially less money. Now, I know if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know that I've gone through a lot of cars, and my son will know for sure that throughout the time that he's been alive, in all of his nearly 25 years, I've probably gone through more cars than years he's been alive. The reality is that yes, I do have a tendency to kind of get bored of my vehicles and then move on, and this is not one of those cases. This is just a matter of circumstance. I really do love this car. This car does offer and provide many things that I absolutely love and enjoy about a fun vehicle, but it doesn't do everything well. It does a lot of things okay. It does some very specific things very well. But again, when it comes to the practicality and of course overall costs in terms of enjoyment, I'm just really not going to get that amount of enjoyment out of it that I once thought I was. So now that leaves the question, well, what else could I buy that is practical, that is fun, that I can drive all year round, and that I can still enjoy while I'm here, but don't feel guilty in terms of its cost, ownership, and that the vehicle is going to be sitting for a long period of time. In my mind, I thought, hey, I happen to know a guy who owns a vehicle that would be a contender, and maybe we should kind of compare vehicles and see how they stack up. Now, I'm sure most of you have probably seen the different reviews all over YouTube between the ND2 or the ND1 Miata, and then of course with the GR86 and the BRZ. And I mean, I'm not here to bore you to death. Stuff you can already find on YouTube as far as the comparisons go, but I'm gonna do my own comparison and see if the GR86 or Subaru BRZ is that much better of a daily driven vehicle than ND2. So before we get started in the BRZ, let's talk about some of the fundamental and mechanical differences. This ND2 Miata is powered by a 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine, and it produces 181 horsepower and about 153 pound-feet of torque. I could be wrong, we'll double check that figure. The Subaru BRZ, however, is powered by a flat 4-cylinder engine, or a boxer, that produces 228 horsepowers, and I'll put it down here. Now let's get to the transmissions, both offering a 6-speed manual transmission mated to a limited slip differential, okay? So mechanically, we've got very comparable cars, with the power advantage being given to the BRZ or the GR86. However, weight for weight, the ND2, even in RF trim, weighs in at about 2,450 pounds, whereas in the Subaru BRZ, if I'm not mistaken, clocks in at just over 2,800 pounds, and in full trim, about 2,900 pounds. So there is a little bit of a weight difference between the two cars. Now let's talk about some of the other differences, some of the things that really make kind of the characteristics and the fun of the vehicle is going to be the handling. The Miata is utilizing a double wishbone A-arm style suspension in the front with a multi-link suspension in the rear. Now there's a lot of aluminum that's also being used in this vehicle, including the double A-arms, and this is a formula that is often regarded as a lot of roadsters. So, you know, specifically like the Honda S2000, you know, other Miatas of the past, and, you know, other roadsters alike, moving away from a McPherson strut setup. Now, I've owned a number of BRZs and, you know, GT86s or whatever the case may be, the twins. And if you've been following the channel, you know that I have. And I'm very aware as to how those vehicles handle. Truthfully, I've always been a bigger fan of a double wishbone suspension setup. I just feel that it articulates better, and there is something to be said about having that active camber. Load the corner up in a double A-arm or a double wishbone vehicle, it actually increases in negative camber, which is going to give the vehicle a little more grip in that wheel, whereas on a McPherson strut based vehicle, it is a static camber setting. Whatever your camber setting is, it remains exactly that throughout the cornering. So we are going to see how they compare, but more specifically how they feel in terms of their mannerisms on the road. Aside from that, it's obvious that one of the biggest differences is going to be the lack of rear seat. Now, albeit the GR86 and the BRZ doesn't exactly have the largest of rear seats, and for all intents and purposes, it's really mainly fit for probably a small child, or you get to, you know, in a pinch, maybe you got to throw a, you know, full-grown adult back there, but it's not going to be the most comfortable of rides, I can assure you of that. But it does offer that rear seat, which is awfully nice, but it's mainly storage. You probably use yours more so for storage than anything. Yeah. So that's the convenient part. The other part of that is that when you fold that rear seat down and utilize that trunk space in conjunction with the rear seat, you've got a lot more storage than this vehicle's capable of providing. Plus, you've got a pass-through where you can, put wheels, tires. As a matter of fact, when I had my other BRZ, I used to load that thing up all the time for the track. I would put in my wheels and tires in, and my toolbox, my 10x10 canopy, jacks, everything I needed for a track day, and it did very, very well. So yeah, you cannot deny its practicality, but more importantly, when it comes to cost, this vehicle, as equipped out of the dealer, was approximately just under $49,000 from Mazda, whereas in the Subaru BRZ or the GR86 are going to come in around the mid-30s. And that's for a really well-equipped option. So it's very difficult to argue the value that you get with that vehicle for the price. So let's go hop in the BRZ and see what that's about. Woo. So immediately, I've already got a spot for my Merce. All right. Now, somehow my son got the genetics to being taller, so I got to move his seat up. I've driven this thing once before. Yeah. And immediately, we're in here, and it's already evident that we've got more space here. We've got clearly more shoulder room. I don't feel like we're on top of each other. Your leg isn't crammed in the footwell here, and you don't have a little cup holder that's kind of banging into your knee. In terms of the fit and finish and the refinement of this vehicle, I find them about the same. I mean, it is, there is more plastic in here, but that's because there's just more interior. So they needed to fill it with more stuff. However, the touch points, like the steering wheel is really nice. I would say it's about the same as the ND Miata. And then of course, like these sills are nice. Like nice, you got that micro suede style. It's a nice departure from the first gen into the second gen here. I think that this is a better suited interior. It's a little more refined. It's a little more, maybe a little more mature. Yeah. It's grown, right? Yeah. We got a 6-speed manual. We've got a manual e-brake, which is perfect. And then we've got heated seats. So again, just like the Miata, we got heated seats. More or less the same dual zone climate control. In the Miata, I only have single. Again, it's a small car. I think cars this size, it's kind of silly to have dual zone. I don't really think it's really necessary. The touch controls and everything are really nice here. I like what they've done. And again, this is a far more refined version to what was already a very good car with the first gen, and now with the second gen, it's a little bit different. So the one thing I noticed right away as we're starting to pull away here is that I find the throttle nowhere near as responsive. I do find that the throttle pedal feels a little more numb. It's not as crisp, and I find the clutch is heavier. So those are two things I noticed right away. Steering feels about the same. It just in the parking lot here, it's got a good amount of weight to it. Feels pretty good. The suspension feels good thus far, and brakes feeling pretty good as well. Shifts are pretty smooth. One thing I recall from my BRZs of days old were the shifter, especially in cold weather, I found would be a little hesitant to go into gear sometimes. Yeah. Again, I don't know what the Miata's like because I haven't really driven it in cold weather, so we'll see. Start to take off here. It's very smooth. The ride is very smooth. One thing I noticed right away is that this suspension is far more composed. It's nowhere near as jarring. I find that in the Miata, it always feels like almost as if the tires are always overinflated. Yeah. Like it's always very bouncy, and from what I understand, it's like basically those Bilsteins are just really over dampened for the car, so you get this like really over dampened shock, but then you don't have the spring rate to support it. So it kind of leaves you like with a bit of a jarring ride. I do find that the 8.6 and the BRZ, this is a lot more refined. This is way smoother actually. In terms of steering input, feels really good. It's really responsive, and the seats are great. I find these are a lot more forgiving for our body types and sizes. Yeah. So far so good. And again, it's more roomy in here. There's just more space, And yeah, this is good. We got a lot of headroom. Now, the one thing that I will say, which was a massive disappointment when I purchased my ND2, was that I didn't realize that there were so few, and what I mean by so few, almost non-existent, roll bar options for the ND RF. The only roll bar available is Flying Miata, and I believe it's a hard dog bar that is made in conjunction with Flying Miata to their specifications. But it renders the retractable roof useless. So you can't use the retractable roof anymore. And I thought to myself, well, that kind of defeats the purpose of this car. I mean, I bought this car with the purpose exclusively, you know, to enjoy it, drop top fun in the summer. And so all of a sudden now, because I enjoy competing on the track in our local time attack series, as per the rules, I've got to run a roll bar. Well, now I can't even put a roll bar in my car without essentially losing my functionality of my retractable roof. That really started to upset me. So the other option, alternatively, was looking into some sort of custom arrangement, having something built that's bespoke for that. But the only problem with that is the associated cost. And then all of a sudden you're getting into something that's like tearing apart the interior. And it started, for me, I didn't really want to do that. It's such a new and expensive car that it's kind of like, man, do I really want to take this $50,000 car, tear it apart, have some fabricator mock up some bar to make it work, hack up the interior? Whereas if you get the soft top version, there's plenty of bolt-in bars that are available that very little trimming of the interior is required and still maintains the functionality of the roof. So I enjoy going to the track, and I get that I'm probably going to be spending a couple of summer months away, but I still want to have the option to go to the track when at all possible. Aside from doing, you know, private lapping days, I can't really do anything else. It's not the end all be all, but it's definitely been something that kind of sucks because I do enjoy going to the track quite a bit, and especially doing the occasional competition. This is where this comes into play because it's not a convertible, I don't need a roll bar. And the roll bar options for this vehicle are actually really, really, really nice. They've got some bolt-in options that are legit bolt-in that really go into the interior seamlessly too. So if you really wanted to run something, you have that option. Now, let's talk about the glaring elephant in the room. The dreaded oil starvation, grenading the motor, yada, yada, yada. Okay. Yes, one of the things that I absolutely love about the Miata is that the engineers, especially when it came to the ND2, they really wanted to make a light rotational mass engine that revved freely, that could also sustain basically constant oil pressure at 1.4 Gs. Now, it's not something we can say about this car, specifically on right-hand turns, so I'm taking it easy on right-hand turns. However, I don't want to sit here and be like, okay, I'm going to completely disregard this as an option because of that. Because the reality is that there's going to be a fix eventually. As a matter of fact, the last few videos that I've seen with respect to that, they basically said that the solution appears to be overfilling, and overfilling the oil pan by about 1 liter. So I guess what we're discovering is that on the hard right-hand turns, the oil is washing around because it's a boxer style engine, and it's moving around to the one side of the engine and not draining back into the pan, thus leaving the pan with short supply of oil. So by overfilling, the idea is that if you overfill, you're going to have hopefully enough oil there that should the oil slosh over to the side of the engine during that long right-hand radius, it should be able to maintain pressure. So I feel confident that there will inevitably be a proper solution, and I think we're probably not far from that. However, there are a lot of guys that track these things that have not had any problems at all.
Yeah.
One guy that I can think that comes to mind was Zygreen, shout out Fenton. His BRZ, when he had his BRZ, he was tracking that thing regularly and never had any issues. Even within Ontario Time Attack, that track these things and don't really have any issues whatsoever. So it's hard to say. Some of them are isolated, but let's see what this thing's got. Yeah, see, it's funny because it's like down low, it feels very similar to the Miata, but until you get into the higher revs, like about $5,000 and above, then you're like, oh, okay, here it comes. This is, yeah, that's actually quite a bit. Because I've never really revved this thing. When he got this car, it didn't even have the break-in done, and I didn't feel right like ripping on this thing. Meanwhile, like I took my Miata to an autocross 1,000 kilometers in, revved the piss out of it because I'm like, why not? But yeah, that was actually pretty surprising. It's good. It's good. Like it is very composed. So when it comes to the suspension, again, we were talking about double wishbone versus Pearson strut. Obviously, without taking it to a track, it's kind of hard to tell. But just in the limited driving I'm doing here, it's like, wow, okay, it's really difficult to see or to feel the difference between this and the ND, in my opinion. Stock for stock, like for like, these cars are typically doing a little better time on the track than the ND Miata is. So something to kind of keep in mind. Now, it does have a little better power, so I mean that probably helps a little bit. This has a really good center of gravity, is really low in this car, which is really nice because of the boxer. Whereas in the Miata, it's more of a 50-50 weight distribution thing. The Subaru's praise is going to be its lower center of gravity, which again helps keep the car neutral and planted. However, the Miata, the engine is essentially rear of the front axle, making it like an S2000, like that front rear midship design, which gives it its nearly perfect 50-50 weight distribution. I think when it comes to that element of either car, I don't think either one of them is a bad option. Heel toe, pretty okay. I think the Miata is a little better when it comes to that. But lots of torque, gobs of torque. Take it easy here because it's a little wet, but yeah, uphill, not a problem. The only downside, if there is that pumped-in audio. You're probably used to it, but I'm like, oh, it sounds so fake. Feels good. Oh yeah, that's nice and flat.
Yeah, these PS4s are like a nice box of the gold.
Yeah, well, yeah. Kind of as we just finish up this drive here, I will say that I'm actually quite impressed with the way that this BRZ drives and handles. And even as we come down the mountain here, I don't feel like the brakes are any less capable. One thing I absolutely love about the Miata is that it does have those factory-equipped Brembos, but they're still pretty small. The rotor dimensions are pretty small. Now, it is a 4-piston, Brembo caliper, which is really nice. But at the end of the day, I don't feel any loss or any lack of braking confidence in this car versus that. Visibility is really good, actually, when compared to the Miata. Smaller rear windscreen and the lack of quarter windows. The visibility is kind of like a big pain in the butt. I like the digital display too. That's really nice. The seats are really comfortable, actually.
Mm-hmm.
They actually provide, what's crazy is that the seats themselves, the Recaros in my Miata look very sporty when compared to this. Upon initial glance, you're like, they don't look overly sporty, but like what I find that the seats in the Miata, they look far sportier, and but they don't feel any more, like they don't hug me any more or any less. I feel like these ones are, although they don't look as sporty, they provide just as much support.
All right, so there we have it. I've driven both vehicles, and you want to know something? What is my decision? I'm undecided. If I'm being honest, I absolutely love my ND Miata. You can't argue this light, nimble chassis combined with the amount of power that they've given in the ND2. However, the practicality and the style and the performance of this BRZ makes it a really tough contender. My opinion is that if you have the option to having another daily vehicle and having this as a second vehicle, hands down, you can't beat the ND2 Miata. However, if you're looking for one vehicle that does everything well, that can be a really good daily commuter, but weekend track car, you can't argue the practicality of the BRZ, not to mention its price. When we're coming in at 49 grand here and about 35 grand here, it's really difficult to see past the obvious value when it comes to the BRZ. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As for what I'm going to do, like I said, I'm undecided, but you'll probably find out in the next video.